Imagine spending your entire life building the most powerful empire your nation had ever seen, only to destroy its future with a single swing of your own hand. Not in battle, not during an assassination, not because of a foreign invasion, but because you lost control for just one moment. History remembers him as Ivan the Terrible, a ruler who conquered kingdoms, rewrote the laws, transformed Russia into an empire feared across Europe, and convinced an entire nation that no one, not even his own family, was safe. To his enemies, he was a monster. To his supporters, he was a visionary willing to do what weaker rulers never could. But neither side could have imagined how his reign would end. Because the greatest threat to Ivan's empire wasn't an invading army. It wasn't a rival king. It wasn't even the thousands of enemies he believed were plotting against him. It was Ivan himself. One violent night, one fatal blow, one dying son, and a dynasty that would never recover. Tonight, we turn to one of the darkest pages in history. Long before Europe called him Ivan the Terrible, he was simply a frightened little boy, a child surrounded by wealth, yet completely abandoned. Ivan was only 3 years old when his father, Grand Prince Vasily III, died. The crown passed to a toddler. Real power did not. The empire immediately became a battlefield, not between countries, but between the noble families inside the palace. The powerful boyar clans fought viciously to control the young prince. Every alliance was temporary. Every smile concealed another betrayal. Every handshake carried another knife. Ivan wasn't raised by loving parents. He was raised by ambitious politicians. According to later accounts attributed to Ivan himself, palace servants ignored him. Meals were withheld. His wishes were dismissed. He watched nobles steal from the royal treasury, while pretending to govern in his name. Whether every memory was literally accurate or partly shaped by later bitterness, one truth is clear. Ivan grew up believing that the people closest to him could never be trusted. And once that belief takes root in a child, it can become almost impossible to uproot. Every humiliation became another lesson. Power wasn't shared. Power was taken. Mercy wasn't rewarded. Fear was. Years later, those lessons would return, not as memories, but as policies. At 16 years old, Ivan did something no Russian ruler had ever done. He crowned himself not merely Grand Prince, but Tsar of All Russia. The title wasn't just symbolic. It announced a new vision of power. The word Tsar drew from the legacy of the Roman Caesars, signaling that Ivan intended to rule with imperial authority rather than as merely the first among nobles. The frightened orphan was gone. In his place stood a confident young ruler determined to reshape his nation. And for a time, he succeeded. Historians often remember the terror. They sometimes forget the reformer. Ivan gathered advisors known today as the Chosen Council. Together, they modernized Russia's government. A revised law code strengthened the justice system. Military reforms created a more disciplined fighting force. Representative assemblies, known as the Zemsky Sobor, brought together clergy, nobles, and town representatives to advise the crown on important matters. While these assemblies did not limit the Tsar in the way a modern parliament would, they marked a significant development in Russian governance. Trade flourished. Fortresses expanded. The state grew stronger. Then came the battlefield. Ivan conquered the khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. These victories secured the Volga River, expanded Russian territory dramatically, and weakened powerful Tatar states that had long threatened Moscow. For many Russians, this wasn't simply conquest. It was liberation from generations of raids and insecurity. The young Tsar seemed unstoppable. His reign opened the path for further expansion into Siberia, a process driven in later years by Cossack expeditions such as that led by Yermak Timofeyevich. The empire was growing. Its future looked limitless. Had history ended there, Ivan might have been remembered as one of Russia's greatest reformers. But history rarely ends. when everything is going well. Sometimes, the event that changes the world is deeply personal. Not a battle, not a revolution, not even a political conspiracy. Just one funeral. The woman who had calmed the most powerful man in Russia was about to die, and with her, something inside Ivan would die too. For all his power, there was one person who could still reach Ivan. His wife, Anastasia Romanovna. She wasn't the wealthiest noblewoman in Russia. She wasn't the most politically connected. She wasn't feared. She was trusted. And for a man who trusted almost no one, that made her the most powerful person in the empire. Contemporary accounts describe Anastasia as gentle, patient, and deeply influential within the royal household. Historians disagree on exactly how much she shaped state policy, but many agree on something else. Her presence seemed to steady Ivan. During these years, the violent storms inside his mind appeared quieter. He still ruled firmly, but he ruled with purpose. Russia continued to expand. Its government became stronger. Its enemies respected and feared it. For a brief moment, the empire had found balance. Then, everything changed. In 1560, Anastasia became gravely ill. No physician could save her. She died at just 30 years old. Her death devastated Ivan. But grief was only the beginning. Very quickly, grief became suspicion. Then suspicion became certainty. Ivan convinced himself that Anastasia had not died naturally. She had been poisoned. Whether she truly was remains uncertain. Modern examinations of her remains detected elevated levels of mercury. But in the 16th century, mercury was also commonly used in medical treatments, making it impossible to conclude that she was deliberately poisoned. There is no definitive historical proof that Anastasia was murdered. But Ivan didn't need proof. He needed someone to blame. From that moment forward, every noble looked guilty. Every advisor became a potential traitor. Every whisper inside the palace sounded like another conspiracy. The ruler who had once wanted to reform Russia began preparing to wage war against his own people. In 1565, Ivan announced a decision so terrifying, it had no precedent in Russian history. He divided the country in two. One part remained under the traditional administration. The other became his personal domain. Known as the Oprichnina, it wasn't merely territory. It was a state within a state, answering to one man, and one man alone, Ivan. To enforce his will, he created a new force, the Oprichniki. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were personally loyal to the Tsar, dressed entirely in black, living almost like a religious order devoted to Ivan, bound not by law, but by obedience. Perhaps the most chilling symbol associated with them was carried on their saddles. A dog's head, and a broom. The meaning was unmistakable. To sniff out treason, and sweep it away. Whether every rider literally carried these symbols has been debated by historians, but the image became one of the enduring emblems of Ivan's reign of terror. The Oprichniki answered no courts, no governors, no noble families, only the Tsar. If Ivan suspected someone, that suspicion became a death sentence. No trial, no defense, no appeal, only punishment. Ancient aristocratic families vanished almost overnight. Estates were confiscated, homes destroyed, entire bloodlines erased. Fear spread faster than any invading army. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Friends accused friends. Brothers betrayed brothers. Because in Ivan's Russia, being innocent no longer guaranteed survival. Only loyalty did, or at least, the appearance of it. Then came the city that would forever symbolize Ivan's paranoia. Novgorod, one of Russia's oldest, wealthiest, and proudest cities. Rumors reached the Tsar that Novgorod intended to betray him. Some claimed its leaders wanted to defect to neighboring Lithuania. Others warned of secret conspiracies. Whether these accusations were genuine, fabricated, or wildly exaggerated remains one of history's great debates. Ivan never waited to find out. He marched. What followed remains one of the darkest chapters of 16th century Russia. For weeks, Novgorod endured executions, torture, looting, and mass killings. Contemporary estimates varied dramatically, and later chroniclers sometimes exaggerated the numbers. Modern historians generally believe that several thousand people were killed. Still an immense human tragedy. Families disappeared. Churches were stripped of valuables. Merchants who had spent decades building fortunes lost everything. The message was unmistakable. If one of Russia's greatest cities could be broken, then nowhere, and no one, was beyond Ivan's reach. Ironically, the campaign weakened the very state Ivan claimed to protect. Trade suffered. Experienced administrators vanished. Trust between the crown and the nobility collapsed. The terror intended to strengthen the empire was quietly hollowing it out from within. An empire can survive enemies beyond its borders. It struggles to survive fear within them. And while Ivan hunted traitors across Russia, the greatest tragedy of his life was growing much closer, not in a distant province, not on a battlefield, but inside his own palace, inside his own family. The man who had executed strangers without hesitation was about to face the only loss he could never replace. By the early 1580s, Russia had changed. Decades of war, terror, and suspicion had left scars across the empire. Yet despite everything, there was still hope. His name was also Ivan, Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich, the Tsar's eldest surviving son, the future of the Rurik dynasty, the man expected to inherit the largest state in Europe. Unlike the frightened boy his father had once been, the young Ivan had grown into a capable prince. He had accompanied military campaigns. He understood government. He had earned respect within the court. Some foreign observers described him as intelligent, courageous, and energetic. For many, he represented something Russia desperately needed: continuity. If the father had forged the empire, the son would preserve it, or so everyone believed. Their relationship had never been simple. The Tsar admired strength, but he demanded absolute obedience. The prince admired his father, yet increasingly questioned the fear that had come to define the kingdom. He had watched the executions, the confiscations, the endless suspicion. He understood something few dared to admit. Russia could not live forever in terror. The heir wanted stability. The father saw enemies everywhere. Those two visions were destined to collide. It was November 1581. One ordinary day, inside an extraordinary palace. The traditional account begins not with politics, but with a family argument. Ivan entered the private chambers of his pregnant daughter-in-law, Yelena. Accounts differ on the precise details. According to the version recorded by several later chroniclers, the Tsar believed her clothing was improper by court standards and, in a fit of rage, physically assaulted her. The attack was so severe that she reportedly miscarried. Some historians question aspects of this story because the surviving sources were written after the event and are not entirely consistent. But all agree, what happened next would change Russian history. The heir confronted his father, not as a subject, but as a husband. He demanded an explanation. He pleaded for restraint. He accused the Tsar of destroying his own family. For perhaps the first time in years, someone stood before Ivan without fear. This wasn't merely a disagreement. It was a challenge. And Ivan had spent decades believing that every challenge was the beginning of betrayal. The room grew silent. Servants froze. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Then, the Tsar exploded. History remembers the next few seconds. more vividly than almost anything else in Ivan's reign. Consumed by rage, the Tsar swung his iron-tipped staff, struck his son on the side of the head. Time seemed to stop. The prince collapsed. Blood spread across the floor. The room fell into absolute silence. Then came the realization. Ivan had not disciplined his heir. He had mortally wounded him. The man who had ordered countless executions was suddenly no longer a ruler. He was a father, and the horror on his face could not be commanded away. According to long-standing tradition, the Tsar cried out in despair, embraced his son, and tried desperately to stop the bleeding. Whether every reported word is authentic cannot be verified, but the image has endured for centuries. A father, holding the son, he himself had destroyed. For days, the Tsarevich lingered between life and death. The palace waited. Priests prayed. Doctors worked helplessly. The Tsar never left his son's side. The empire's most feared man could do nothing. No army could save him. No decree could reverse what had happened. Power had finally met its limit. Several days later, the heir died. He was 27 years old. With him died the future Ivan had spent decades building. The Rurik dynasty still had another son, Fifer, but Fifer was profoundly different from his brother. Gentle, deeply religious, more comfortable with prayer than politics. He would inherit the throne, but not his brother's forceful leadership. And everyone at court knew it. Ivan had conquered kingdoms, broken cities, destroyed noble families. Yet in one uncontrollable moment, he had dealt the most devastating blow to himself. It is one of history's cruelest ironies. The ruler who spent a lifetime hunting imaginary traitors became the greatest threat to his own dynasty. But the true cost of that night would not be measured immediately. It would unfold after Ivan himself was gone, slowly, relentlessly, until an empire stood on the edge of collapse. The funeral ended. The prayers were spoken. The heir was buried. But for Ivan, that night never ended. The man who had terrified an empire now found himself haunted by something far more powerful than any enemy: memory. Contemporary accounts suggest the Tsar was overcome with grief after his son's death. He withdrew for long periods. He prayed obsessively. He gave generous donations to monasteries and churches, seeking spiritual comfort in the final years of his life. Whether these acts reflected repentance, fear of divine judgment, or simple sorrow, only Ivan himself could have known. He still wore the crown. He still commanded armies. He still ruled the largest state in Europe. But something inside him had broken. The ruler who had spent decades believing he could control every outcome had finally discovered one truth no emperor can escape: some mistakes cannot be conquered. In March 1584, Ivan the Terrible died. According to several historical accounts, he collapsed while playing a game of chess inside the Kremlin. Whether death came from illness, a stroke, or other natural causes remains uncertain. Modern examinations of his remains have fueled debate, but no single explanation has been universally accepted. The man who had dominated Russia for nearly 4 decades was gone. The throne now belonged to his surviving son, Fifer I. Unlike his father, Fifer had little interest in warfare or court intrigue. He was deeply religious, quiet, gentle. Many contemporaries considered him unsuited to govern a realm as vast and volatile as Russia. Real political influence increasingly rested with his brother-in-law, Boris Godunov. For the moment, the transition appeared peaceful, but appearances can be deceptive. The dynasty that had ruled Russia for more than 7 centuries was standing on fragile ground. The strongest branch had already been cut away. In 1598, Fifer I died without leaving an heir. With his death, the ancient Rurik dynasty came to an end. For the first time in centuries, Russia had no clear dynastic successor. The vacuum was enormous. Boris Godunov became Tsar. But legitimacy is a fragile thing, especially when the bloodline that once united a nation has disappeared. Then disaster struck. Between 1601 and 1603, catastrophic famine swept across Russia. Harvests failed. Millions suffered. Hundreds of thousands are believed to have died. Desperation spread through every corner of the country. Then came rebellion. Then came pretenders. Men claiming to be Dmitri, Ivan's youngest son, long believed dead, appeared, each insisting he was the rightful ruler of Russia. Some found powerful foreign backers. Others found desperate followers willing to believe almost anything if it promised stability. Poland intervened. Sweden intervened. Russian nobles changed sides. The throne changed hands. Civil war consumed the nation. History would remember these years as the time of troubles. It lasted until 1613, when the Romanov dynasty finally restored a measure of stability. The causes were many: dynastic extinction, political instability, famine, foreign intervention, ambitious nobles, and yes, the long shadow cast by Ivan's reign. The death of the heir in 1581 did not, by itself, cause the time of troubles, but it removed the strongest successor to the throne and left the dynasty more vulnerable to every crisis that followed. Sometimes, history is not changed by one event alone. Sometimes, one event weakens the foundation until the entire building eventually collapses. Ivan the Terrible remains one of history's greatest contradictions. He centralized power, expanded Russia dramatically, reformed government, strengthened the military, and transformed Moscow into the heart of a growing empire. He was neither a simple hero nor a simple monster. He was both builder and destroyer. The same determination that allowed him to unite Russia also convinced him that fear was stronger than trust. The same suspicion that protected his throne eventually poisoned his judgment. The same iron will that conquered kingdoms could not conquer his own anger. His greatest enemy was never Poland, never the Tatars, never the boyars. It was the voice inside his own mind that whispered, "Everyone is coming for you." And once he believed that, every disagreement looked like treason. Every criticism became betrayal. Even his own son appeared as another threat to control. History often teaches us that empires fall because of invading armies, economic collapse, or political revolution. But sometimes, an empire begins to fall inside the mind of the person wearing the crown. Perhaps that is why Ivan's story still feels so modern. Because absolute power does not merely reveal a person's character. It amplifies it. Grief becomes obsession. Suspicion becomes policy. Fear becomes law. And anger becomes history. So here's the question: if the greatest threat to an empire isn't always the enemy beyond its borders, but the darkness growing inside its ruler, how many civilizations were destroyed, not by war, but by one moment when power finally lost control of itself? Because sometimes, history doesn't end with a battle. It ends with a single decision. And that is the darker page.